opening image. The opening image of the pilot episode of Barry is Barry in a dark hotel room cleaning up after a hit. The camera follows Barry's movements across the room and ultimately lands on the dead man in bed. This sets up the genre, that we're dealing with a crime story and a story that deals with violence, and it also sets up the visual style. It also sets up the tone of the show, that it's matter-of-fact, it's mundane, it's not a sensationalist super spy kind of crime story. It also sets up Barry as a character. We see him at work on a normal day, we get a sense of who he is and what he does. The closing twist. At the end of the episode, Barry has resolved to kill Ryan, but the Chechens get to him before Barry can. This sets up the greater drama of the season and puts Barry in direct conflict with the Chechen mob. It also provides obstacles to what Barry wants. If he wants to escape the life of being a hitman and become an actor, it's much more complicated when he has the Chechen mob out to get him. We also get a hint at future obstacles when we see the lipstick camera blinking in the Chechen's truck. The A, B, and C stories. We can break the pilot episode of Barry down into 19 discrete scenes. If we then color coordinate those scenes based on which story they belong to, they look like this. I've put this into 5 different categories. The first is status quo. These are the first 3 scenes of the episode. They're not really a part of any of the major story beats. They just sort of set up Barry as a character. We see him finishing up a hit, flying home, and playing video games in his apartment. We get a sense of who he is, what he does, and how he feels about it. I've also separated off the final scene, which is just the final moment. It's Barry in the diner talking to the waitress. The A story. The A story is Barry as a hitman. This is scenes 6, 7, 8, 11, 14, and 18. Scenes 11 and 14 are overlapping with the B story. Scene 6 is where Barry goes to LA, meets NoHo Hank and Goron, and gets his assignment. Scene 7 is when Barry picks up a gun from FedEx. Scene 8 is when he watches Ryan from his car. Scene 11 is when Ryan and Barry actually meet in real life to do their scene together. Scene 14 is when Barry drives Ryan home and the Chechens catch him. And scene 18 is when Barry goes to kill Ryan and the Chechens turn on him. The stakes in the A story are pretty clear. They're the stakes of life or death, being caught doing crime, and they're also financial. The B story. The B story in the pilot episode of Barry is the acting class. This is scenes 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, and 17. Scenes 11 and 14 overlap with the A story. Scene 9 is when Barry interrupts Sally and gets pulled into the acting class. Scene 10 is Sally's scene and Kusuno's argument with her. Scene 11 is Ryan and Barry's scene together. Scene 12 is when Sally invites Barry to residuals. Scene 13 is at residuals. Scene 14 is when Barry drives Ryan home and the Chechens catch him. Scene 16 is when Barry is outside of the acting class watching them. Scene 17 is when Barry does his monologue for Kusuno and gets invited into the class. The stakes in the B story are much more internal than the stakes of the A story. Barry is concerned here with fitting in, being a part of a group, feeling appreciated by that group, and it has a lot more to do with what he wants out of life than his external stakes and well-being. The C story. In the pilot episode of Barry, the C story is Barry's relationship with Fuchs. So this is scenes 4, 5, and 15. There's not a lot happening in the C story of this one, but it does give us a stronger sense of Barry's backstory and builds out the world for us. It also gives him a place to express more philosophical questions about whether he can leave being a hitman and become an actor and what his purpose is in life. So, if we map out our inciting incident and climax and our 3 turning points on this map of our scenes, we see that the inciting incident happens around scene 4, which is when Fuchs gives Barry his assignment with the Chechen mob, and that launches our A story. Then, we have our first turning point around scene 9, which is when Barry interrupts Sally and is brought into the acting class. Then we have our second turning point around scene 14, when Barry drives Ryan home and is caught by the Chechens. Then we have our third turning point at scene 17, when Barry does his monologue for Kusuno and gets accepted into the class. And then we have our climax, when Barry has a shootout with the Chechens and Ryan is killed. Let's dig into the inciting incident and turning points in more detail. The inciting incident happens in scene 4, when Fuchs gives Barry his next assignment for the Chechen mob, and continues as Barry goes to LA and meets the Chechen mob. The first turning point occurs when Barry interrupts Sally outside of the acting class, and then is invited inside and asked to come on stage. The second turning point happens as Barry gets to know the acting class at residuals and continues as he decides to spare Ryan's life. The third turning point happens when Barry decides to be honest with Kusuno about what he does, but Kusuno takes it as a monologue. The setup there is the honesty, and the payoff is his admission to the acting class. The main characters. Our main character, of course, is Barry. Barry's conflicts and stakes are pretty clear. We know immediately that he's a dissatisfied hitman, and we learn throughout the episode that he wants to be an actor. Moreover, we understand that Barry wants a purpose in life. He wants acceptance and approval from others. His internal conflicts have to do with leaving the job of being a hitman and becoming an actor, and his external stakes have a lot to do with his safety and well-being as he works for dangerous people. Fuchs. Fuchs's motivations are less clear, but we sense that he has a financial motivation in keeping Barry safe, and also that he cares for him. And his stakes are pretty high. Because he works with Barry in a dangerous profession, he's also at risk of life and limb. Sally. Sally's primary stakes have to do with her being an actress. She has some insecurity about that and comes up against obstacles of not succeeding as an actress. Her stakes are high for her. Kusuno. Kusuno's stakes are also a little bit hard to nail down, but we understand that he's a bit discouraged by the talent of his students and cares a lot about truth and the theater. He sees Barry as promising. And finally, we have the Chechen mob. Their stakes are also pretty clear. They want revenge on Ryan for sleeping with Goran's wife, and later on in the episode, they want revenge on Barry for his perceived betrayal. The stakes with them are very high. They also have to do with life and limb, but also to a certain extent with honor and loyalty. Visual choices. Throughout the pilot episode of Barry, the show makes specific visual choices to set up the show's tone and story. For example, there's a lot of focus on facial expressions and close-ups. This is significant because so much of the story's journey has to do with Barry's emotions, how he feels about things. It also gives us a lot of wide shots, which are used both for humor and to impart a sense of isolation. It separates Barry from the rest of the crowd. We also have a very specific color palette here. It's dark and shadowy, lots of blues and reds, and it's noticeably different at various points, almost to mimic Barry's emotional journey. To conclude, the pilot episode of Barry, Make Your Mark, sets up the season effectively, both in terms of characters, dramatic questions, and the show's tone and style. It's clear from the single 30-minute episode where the show is heading.